Thank you very much for taking the time to join us for an update on the Charter Hall Direct Office Fund. For those that don't know me, my name's Steve Bennett and I head up the direct property business at Charter Hall. We know your time's valuable, so today's agenda is very short. I'm going to put up a slide where it refreshes you on who all the key contacts are. I'll run through all the key metrics on the Direct Office Fund, and then I'll finally finish with a bit of an update on some of the economic and global considerations at the moment. The slide that you can see right now shows the key members of the distribution team, and although I know many of you are already familiar with these people, at this time we're very focused on providing even more regular and transparent communications than we usually do. Additionally, you'll see up on the slide there Miriam Patterson, who joins us from one of the wholesale superannuation funds, and she's now the Direct Office Fund Fund Manager and brings with her a wealth of experience in not only assisting myself, but the wider team at Charter Hall. Up on the slide, you'll see a couple of the key things that have changed since the last webinar which we gave. At 31 March, we obtained full independent valuations of the entire portfolio, and we'll do the same again at 30 June. The reason for this is we believe it is very important to make sure those valuations are up to date. Additionally, we had the fund's major review event, whereby we repaid everyone who wished to redeem in full in the March quarter, and keeping with our proactive approach, we refinanced the fund's debt facility to not only push out the debt term, but which benefited investors through lowering the debt cost as well. And because we're talking about a property fund, it's important to understand the key statistics. So DOF is now over $2.2 billion and benefits from a diversified portfolio. It's providing investors a distribution yield annualised at 5.5%, and we continue to pay distributions on a quarterly basis. And for anyone that's ever met me before, you'll know we're always focused on taking out as many of the known risks as we can. And to do that, we have very high occupancy levels and also long-term leases with a weighted average lease expiry of over 8 years. And because many of you will have had clients that have been invested in the Direct Office Fund for a considerable period of time, it's always important to know how the fund's progressed and how it's performed. So you can see up there on the slide, we've significantly outperformed the benchmark on all the key periods of measurement. But as usual with these kind of things, caveated, past performance is no guide to future performance. But having said that, we are very proud of the returns we've been able to deliver to our clients in the fund. So I just talked about the strength of the Direct Office Fund's long-term leases and high occupancy rate. But the next thing to ask yourself is, what's the tenant quality? Who's paying the rental payments? You can see up there on the slide, the top tenants are government entities, accounting for 30% of the net income of the fund. They're the best tenants you can have because they have the strongest credit rating. They're also backed up by other strong tenants such as Suncorp Bank, Coles, Western Sydney University and Westpac, with the top 5 tenants accounting for over 60% of the fund's net property income. The next slide which I'll talk to talks about the expiry profile of the Direct Office Fund's tenants. It isn't traditionally something we've provided to advisors, but given the current climate, I think it is a key benefit of the fund. What you can see there is there's not even more than 5% of lease expiries until year 2025, and the lion's share of 60% plus is right at the back end. Why am I talking about that? Well, it's very simple. It means because of the way we've structured the leases, even if there is some short or medium-term weakness in the Australian economy, the majority of the tenants in the portfolio are locked in for the long term. The next slide shows where the $2.2 billion portfolio is weighted geographically within Australia. You can see here it's pretty self-evident that the focus has been on the most liquid, deep markets in the eastern seaboard, with Sydney having the highest weighting at 44%, Melbourne 25% and Brisbane 23%. There's a good diversification with 14 assets and the average property size a little over $150 million. The next key area which I'll talk to is around the debt facility of the Direct Office Fund. What you can see is that we've extended the debt maturity term out to 4.5 years, and we've done something that's very difficult to do at the best of times, yet alone in the current economic climate. But not only did we extend that debt term, meaning more security of the debt facility, but we also lowered the margin or the debt costs, which benefits investors. We have 4 banks in that debt pool, and we also have significant headroom, which you can see on the right-hand side of that chart, to all the key financial covenants. The next slide shows some more granular detail on the individual properties that make up the Direct Office Fund portfolio. I've already talked about the long-term leases of over 8 years, the high occupancy level of 97%, but the area I haven't spoken about yet is the fixed annual rental increases, which for this fund average 3.6%. That's important because each year, on average, the leases are contractually obligated to increase by that level, which ultimately, over the medium to long term, benefits investors through higher levels of income. I also wanted to provide, as part of this webinar, an update on the Tenancy Code of Conduct. As many of you may be aware, the various state governments throughout Australia have legislated that landlords must, in certain limited circumstances, provide rental relief to tenants. The way the code works is it only applies to small and medium enterprises that have turnover of less than 50 million and who have seen a drop in their turnover of 30% or more. I'm very pleased to say that the proportion of small and medium enterprise tenants is relatively low for the fund, and in fact, as I stand here today, we've given less than 0.5% to tenants in terms of rent relief. I would also say that ultimately, for these smaller tenants, it's in investors' best interest that the landlord does help them manage through this difficult time, so that on the other side, we have viable and strong businesses that can continue to pay the rent for the long term. And to wrap up today's webinar, I'm going to touch on some of the short, medium and longer term structural impacts that you should be aware of. The first is government intervention. I just spoke about the Tenancy Code of Conduct, but that's expected to be just a short-term thing, and because of the way we've structured the tenant quality in the fund, will have very little impact on the direct office fund. The second thing is that it will be clear, like through all cycles, that there's a flight to quality. What do I mean by that? Well, it means that there will be greater demand for the prime, that's the highest quality assets, and you'll see a more divergent pricing between those prime assets and the secondary or lower quality stock. Transaction volumes are definitely off at the moment. In a period where everyone's locked at home, where international travellers can't come to the country, that's purely to be expected. But what this will mean is that for groups and funds that are well capitalised, have teams on the ground, there'll be opportunities to acquire assets and potentially acquire them in a less competitive environment that would otherwise not have been available. Finally, I would say that the Sydney and office and Australian markets more generally have entered this place of volatility in a period of relative strength. The vacancy rates in Sydney and Melbourne are at or near their 20 or 30 year vacancy lows, meaning that they're well placed to absorb some additional supply, or if demand does come off in the short term. Thank you for taking the time to watch this webinar and update on the Charter Hall Direct Office Fund. I hope you walk away with not only an update on the key statistics, but also how we focus on long-term leases, high levels of occupancy, and the strength of the tenant covenant. Thank you very much.